All right. We are in 1 Kings, and in our last setting, now of course we had the fifth Wednesday singing last Wednesday, so we did not have class through 1 Kings. In the previous class, we had pretty well wrapped up 1 Kings chapter 20, and what we're going to be going into this evening is 1 Kings chapter 21. Now, just by way of reminder, kind of what took place in chapter 20 to get our minds back where we're at within the text. Remember, early on there, even in chapter 20, there was a little bit of an issue with those from Syria coming and pressing in against Israel. It was Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, coming in against Ahab, the king of Israel. And basically what Ben-Hadad had told Ahab was, your closest belongings, your children, your wives, your gold, your silver, I'm taking back with me. And remember what Ahab's response was? Oh, yes, my Lord, even myself, right? Even I belong to you, essentially is what he said, willing to consent completely. Well, when he received word or got word to the elders of Israel, they told him, look, you cannot consent to this. So then he kind of changed his tone, and basically what that did was give him political backing to go to war against Syria. Now, when Syria came in, it was almost as if they just knew they were going to win that war, and it seemed very much that they had the numbers to do so with ease. But remember, the prophet of the Lord came, and he gave word to Ahab saying, you're going to be victorious in this battle. You're actually going to win this fight because the Lord is going to assist you in this. And he says, you will know that Yahweh is God. Right? That was the purpose. Well, they were victorious in that first battle. Prophet comes back onto the scene and tells him, look, this is not over. There's still another fight to be had. They're coming back in the spring. You need to prepare yourself for this next fight. So they do. Ben-Hadad comes back. There's another battle. It says there's a great multitude. It even explains the army of Israel as if there are these two little herds of goats in comparison to all these men who line the terrain, right? This massive army coming against this small army, but the Lord delivers them yet again, gives them this victory. And remember what Ahab did at the end of this battle with Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria. Rather than bringing about God's judgment upon this Syrian king, he decided to make a treaty with him, to make an alliance with him, to buddy up with him. He even called him his brother. Well, at the close of chapter 20, a prophet of the Lord had come back to Ahab and told him that was not what was supposed to take place. You were to bring God's judgment upon him. He was to be killed. It was going to eradicate King Hadad and his beliefs out of the land. It was going to drive them out. Yet Ahab was not willing. Instead, he made a treaty. Well, after these words from the prophet, basically what Ahab did, at the end of the chapter, it said he walked away sullen and displeased, right? His countenance, you could say, fell. He was walking away pouting because of what the prophet came and said. And the prophet told him, here's what it cost you, your life. That's what he was warned about at the end of chapter 20. All right? So now, coming into chapter 21, here's the idea that we're going to be looking at, Ahab's disregard for the Lord's righteousness. Now, in the previous chapter, we looked at it as Ahab's disregard for the Lord's will or his cause. He was not going to fulfill God's will in not killing Ben-Hadad. Now, coming into chapter 21, we're going to be looking at it in the sense of his disregard for the Lord's righteousness. Now, when we think about the Lord's righteousness, how I want us to approach this, there is a right way for God's people to live. There's a right way for us to handle situations. There's a right way for us to communicate with people. This is God's righteousness as we understand it and how we implement it even in our lives, living as God would have us to live. All right, that's kind of the thought that we're going to go into this text with. Also, something to keep in mind, as it pertained to the land that they had, God had certain standards for that land, what they could do with the land, how they were supposed to treat the land. It was not something that was supposed to be sold. It was not something that they had the right to give away, any of those things. This land was given to them by God. Right? That was his giving it to them, and he had a standard as it pertains to what they could do with that land. All right. If someone will read 1 Kings chapter 21, verses 1 through 4 for us.
And it came to pass, after these things, that Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard which was in Jezreel, next to the palace of Ahab king of Samaria. So Ahab spoke to Naboth, saying, give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden. because it is near, next to my house, and for it I will give you a vineyard better than it. Or, if it seems good to you, I will give you its worth in money. But Naboth said to Ahab, the Lord forbid that I should give the inheritance of my fathers to you. So Ahab went into his house, sullen and displeased, because of the word which Naboth the Jezreelite had spoken to him. For he had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face, and would eat no food. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, why is your spirit so sullen that you eat no food?
Right, thank you. All right, first thing I want us to look at, Ahab's willfulness. And by that I mean his willfulness to look at something, see it, want it, and say, you know what, I need to have that, regardless of what God's law says on the matter. He of all people should have had understanding of what the law was pertaining to the land. Also, when it comes to King Ahab, something else we need to keep in mind, what was the king's responsibility to the people? Two things, actually, we could say.
Protect them for one.
Protect them for one, right? So you have the military aspect, so that's the third reason, actually. Uphold the law, right? There was this responsibility that he had to make sure that justice was rendered to all people. He was also to be the spiritual leader to them, but he was also supposed to bring justice and legal fairness to all of Israel. That's part of his responsibility. Now we have him in this scenario looking at this land that's beside his place, located very closely to his palace. He sees it and he says, you know what, that looks real nice. I think I want that. Well, what does God's law say about these properties?
They're not to trade hands like that.
Not to trade hands. Not to trade hands. They're not to be sold. Nothing of that nature is supposed to happen with these properties. Now,
It's supposed to be generational.
that's right. It's supposed to remain with the generations as they come, right? This is directly tied back to his ancestors and what was given by God when they came into the land. Well, the location we're talking about here that's being under consideration, Samaria would have been the location of Ahab's one palace, we'll say. Right? That's the capital of Israel. What they believe is this would have been another palace, possibly like the idea of a winter palace, a secondary palace that he would have had. And at this palace, this one that is in Jezreel, this is the location where Naboth has this particular vineyard. Now it's interesting when you come into the text looking at verses 1 and 2, I don't think it's by coincidence that it actually specifies Naboth the Jezreelite in Jezreel. Right? That's kind of given us a little bit of an understanding. This is an ancestral inheritance that he has received from his fathers. This was given to them by God. So he understands this possession. He understands what it means and how God expects him to hold on to that land. So you come into it and now you have Ahab saying, you know what, I want it. Completely disregarding any type of tie that God would have saying, this is land I have given you. Well, someone who is carnally minded is going to have no kind of thought to anything that's sacred, and everything in his mind is going to have a price. Because basically he says, look, I'll trade you land just like it for it, or if it be the case, I'll give you enough money to pay for it, whatever you want. Completely overlooking the fact that this was land given by God, not for him to have. All right? Well, what seems to be Ahab's main reason for wanting this vineyard?
It's convenient, it's next to his house.
Convenient, right? That's all it boils down to. He's willing to try and have this man break God's command, break God's law, simply because this vineyard is close to his place. And he doesn't even want to use it for a vineyard. He wants to turn it into a vegetable garden. Right? Doesn't even want to use it for what it is. Simply a matter of proximity. You know, in this 2 weeks ago, in doing a lesson on coveting, or doing a lesson on contentment, and even talking about coveting things that do not belong to us, I gave a definition of coveting being this, where we run out ahead of God and try and show God the life that we think we need, where being content is waiting on God to show us the life he knows we need. Right? How blessed is Ahab as the king of Israel? How much does he have in belongings and things and wealth? Right? Beyond blessed. At least 2 houses, right? At least 2 palaces, yet he still wants this vineyard that belongs to another man. Wanting to show God what he thinks he needs rather than accepting everything that God has given him. All right? Verses 3 through 4 Naboth's response actually shows reverence for the Lord. Right, verse 3, he says, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." This is more than him just saying, you know what, no, I don't want to get rid of this land. It's more than him saying, no, I want this land, I use this land. This is him saying, this is by the Lord's word. I cannot give you this land. This is not right. Forbid, right? Lord forbid that I should give you this, the inheritance of my father. Somebody look up Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 23. Leviticus 25 verse 23, and somebody else, Numbers chapter 36 and verse 7. Leviticus 25, 23. Numbers 36 verse 7.
The land shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine, for you are strangers and sojourners with me.
Right? The land should not be sold, right? Who has the,
So the inheritance of the children of Israel shall not change hands from tribe to tribe. For every one of the children of Israel shall keep the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers.
okay, so in the first text it was read, right, it's not to change hands. It's not to be sold. This property that was given by God. And maybe you could look at it in that context and say, okay, maybe that's talking about people outside of the tribes of Israel. But by the time you come around and look at Numbers chapter 36, this says this does not change hands between tribes either. Right? There's no exchanging of my property for your property. This is not supposed to take place. If you go back and look at Deuteronomy, the responsibility of the kings, I'll get to you in just a second. The responsibility of the kings was also to have a written form of the law, for them to have that so that they could read that, so that they could know that. He should have knew this, right? Ahab should have known this. Yes, ma'am.
1 Samuel 8:14 says, "And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, and your olive groves, and give them to his servants."
Right, and that's talking about basically when Saul was going to be placed as the first king, and Samuel tried to warn against, okay, here's what it's going to look like to have an earthly king rather than just following after the Lord. Right, there was some caution to that because how these kings would treat the people. Well, you definitely see it with kings like Ahab and how they begin to treat the people. We'll see it more so with Jezebel. Do you have your hand up? You forgot. Andy?
Going back to talking about them, that they should have known the law. That's one thing I was kind of thinking about was, since they have so far departed from God's righteousness, since David and Solomon, I wonder if that was ignorance on his behalf, and that's why he got so pouty, so to speak, that he wouldn't sell the land, or if that was complete disdain and disregard for God's law, that he tried to buy the land, regardless of what God's law said.
Right. Hard to say. He was just kind of rebuked in the previous chapter
Either
for
way,
his
it's
actions.
sad.
Yeah, either way, it's real sad how he acts. It's almost like a 4 or 5-year-old. They didn't get their way. They stomp off. They go lay in their room with their head toward the wall, and they just sit there and pout and sulk because they didn't get their way, and they just lay there for hours thinking somebody's going to give in, right? But it doesn't happen. That's how he's behaving, because he says, no, I'm not going to go against what the Lord has said. I'm not going to give you this land. I can't sell you this land. It belongs to the Lord, essentially, and I have no right to give this away to you. Well, when he responds, when Naboth responds and says, the Lord forbid, it should at least jogged something in Ahab's mind. What should he had responded here?
Oh, you're right. My
Yeah.
bad.
He must have asked, I don't feel like.
Huh?
I feel like he would know that was supposed to be given, and he would, to me, I feel like if he is the king, he would know that land was given to him by God.
Right?
So he shouldn't have even asked.
Yeah, he should have never asked in the first place.
Can't remember.
Never should have. But, maybe it was the case that he just didn't think about that. Maybe he's not keeping up that well with the law. Obviously not. Nonetheless, when he's told, look, the Lord forbid, here's why I can't do this, his immediate response should have been, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry.
So would there be, he does know God, is that correct, or is it not correct? This whole time
He,
he's rebelling against God, but he does know he exists, correct?
He's had the prophets come to him. He was assisted in the previous battles, not one, but twice.
Yes.
Delivered, right, because the Lord fought with them against a great multitude. He has an understanding about Yahweh.
Okay.
He's choosing not to, and a lot of that, I think, is the influence of his wife. Right, he witnessed Elijah on the mountain.
Yeah, that's.
There's so much that has happened in the previous chapters. there's no way that he does not know who Yahweh is.
Right.
He's choosing
To rebel.
just to rebel against him.
Be
And he
selfish.
probably had never read the law, because then he would have probably never had the battle of the prophets, and he'd have probably never done any of these things that's leading up to ultimately him and his family being torn up by the dogs.
Mhm.
But, you know, I mean, I don't think he had much respect for God or his law, or
Right.
cares about it, the people,
Wouldn't-
or any of that. And I think it has a lot to do with, as you just said, influence.
Yeah,
And it's another lesson on be careful who we let influence
yeah.
us.
Well, and even, the final words in chapter 20, your life, basically, you did not take this man's life, now it's your life, it's gonna cost you, right? That should have jolted him or something. That should have changed his course just a little bit, but it doesn't seem to. So he's gonna go away basically sullen and displeased is what it says there in verse 4. You could actually look at that in the sense of sullen and enraged, right? There's anger that is carrying with that second word in the text. The idea of displeased is even the sense of anger. Well, if this were only said of Ahab once, this type of response to not getting his way or being rebuked, if this only happened once, we could say, you know what? Maybe we could chalk it up to just a bad day, right? Maybe he just had a bad day. Maybe something happened, had a bad attitude. He responded poorly. But this is the second time in like 5 verses that we see this same response, right? When the prophet came to him, rebuked him, sullen and displeased is how he left. Now when he doesn't get this land, he's sullen and displeased, and he goes and he pouts in his room, won't even eat his meal. This is a character flaw that we're seeing right here. This is a poor character flaw that we're seeing in him. This is how he responds when he doesn't get his way. Yes. Mm-hmm.
He's angry at the Lord because of what he did to Uzzah.
Right.
And he responded in a way that almost is similar to this about the pouting part.
Right.
But the way he reacts after is the
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely some comparisons that could be made there. The one thing, at least with David, there was communication toward God expressing his feelings, right? God, I think he wants us to express our feelings and communicate through prayer on things. David was willing to do that. It doesn't seem that Ahab really took any kind of initiative like that at all. Rather, he just got angry. Johnny?
I was gonna say, it seems like a lot of folks these days, it doesn't matter what is right or what you want, what I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that when I read through this and I was looking back over it today and I started thinking about it, because, this very much shows kind of just who he is and how he responds. And I got to thinking about it, do we have any poor responses like that that might be somewhat our character? Right? Are there things in different times where maybe things are not going in our favor? Or maybe something has happened and maybe somebody's being somewhat aggressive towards us and all of a sudden we respond in some sort of poor manner? That is a character flaw, something we need to work on. This is obviously the way he handles situations, is he pouts and kind of throws a fit. And he goes to his room and basically he does nothing. He lays in his bed, it says, he turned away his face and he would not eat. One of the guys I was listening to on this particular section, he said the victim mentality will never get us closer to God. Right? If we respond in this sense where basically we're always the victim, right? We have that mindset, well, I just can't get it right. Everybody's out to get me. Everybody, that kind of mindset, we're never going to draw close to God. That's kind of where he's at. He's the victim when he's actually the one who's in the wrong. Right? That's the way he's thinking through this. Our responses may not be this extreme, but if we do have responses that are not becoming of a child of God, those are things that we need to work on, right? We need to respond properly. All right, let's look at this next section, verses 5 through 16. We have Ahab's willfulness, right? Just willing to go ahead and try and take what land he wanted, regardless of God's law. And now we have Jezebel's craftiness that we're going to see in verses 5 through 16. If someone will, go ahead and read for us Read for us verse 5 through verse 10.
But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, Why is your spirit so sullen that you eat no food? He said to her, Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, Give me your vineyard for money, or else, if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give you my vineyard. Then Jezebel, his wife, said to him, You now exercise authority over Israel. Arise, eat food, and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. And she wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with his seal, and sent the letters to the elders and the nobles who were dwelling in the city with Naboth. She wrote in the letters, saying, Proclaim a fast, and set Naboth with high honor among the people, and seat 2 men, scoundrels, before him to bear witness against him, saying, You have blasphemed God and the king. Then take him out and stone him, that he may die.
Thank you, sir. Something about Jezebel. She is wise with what one man said, devilish wisdom. It's quite interesting how she handles this situation. You'll see more what I mean as we work through this text. AG?
When he was sad or doing whatever, and then when he didn't even let her know that it was because anything to do with God. You know what I'm saying? He was like, he just won't give me the land.
Yeah. He's focused only on what he wants and what he didn't get.
But shouldn't she know that it was given by God also?
We'll get to some of those thoughts here in a minute because it's kind of interesting how she handles this.
So, I mean, so I guess is it just because that she's Ahab's wife that she can just write these folks and be like, do this, and they do it? I mean,
Well,
is she over them too?
We're gonna kind of get into some of that and kind of see what we can come up with. Remember who it is that we're talking about.
I know, but she didn't have, she had nothing to offer these folks. I mean, she wasn't doing anything for these other people.
One of the things that she had was a fear factor because how she handled things. It's a scary, scary thing when Jezebel says, I will get that vineyard for you, right? Think about this whole situation and where Ahab's at, right? He's in there pouting in his bed, basically, and I guess we can kind of, the saying, who wears the pants in the relationship? She comes in, she's going to start giving the orders about what needs to happen. Well, she's going to call him out and say, basically, look, you need to act like a king. Now, this is not the kind of king that God would have him to act in the way that she's saying. She's thinking about where she's from, Tyre, Sidon, the Phoenicians, right? She's thinking about that kind of king mentality. And she's saying, get up, act like a king. Do you rule this people or not? If you want this, go get it. That's her mindset. If you like it, you want it, you have it no matter what the cost, no matter who it hurts, no matter who it offends. That's what she's saying. Get up and act like a king, right? That's her words to the king. Now, again, it's a scary statement when she says, I will give you the vineyard. Heads are about to roll and lives are about to be taken because a severe price is about to be paid to attain this land for him. But it doesn't seem that he has any question, any concern, even how she's going to go about doing it. Basically, he says, you handle it, right? That's what it seems like. She says, I'll make this happen. He's fine with it. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, even though she is planning to do this, in reality, it still should not have changed hands. It should have went to his heirs.
Right. We'll get to that also. It'll come up even later in 2 Kings, about 2 Kings chapter 9. There's more information that's given to us that's not seen here in 1 Kings chapter 21. But we'll see it as we work forward.
Hey, Jerrod.
Yes.
Even the fact, that statement that she makes, I will give you the vineyard, I mean, he's the king. And she just, by saying that, just totally usurps God's authority.
Mm-hmm.
And he does not even question that.
Doesn't even flinch.
It's not even, that tells you how far from God he is.
Yeah. And he's just been warned by God about his behavior. Right? He's fine with this. He doesn't care at all. Martha, do you have something?
Acts Exodus 22:28 says, "You shall not revile God nor curse a ruler of your people."
Right? She's very much behaving in such fashion, right? She doesn't necessarily care what God thinks on the matter either. But here's what's interesting. She knows what God thinks about this. She knows what God's law is on this matter, and we're going to see her use God's law to her advantage to make this happen. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if maybe if he doesn't question her because that can be used, ignorance can be used defense, like she handled it, I don't know what she did, she just did it, like, do you think that's his cop out for what, so it's not, he's always a victim, so when you're always a victim, nothing is ever your fault.
Right.
So do you think maybe that's why?
It could be. My own thought just after reading through it and studying through it, I really think that he just turns a blind eye. He wants it badly enough that he doesn't care how it's attained, and he's going to turn his head while she does what she does. He knows who she is, right? He knows what she's capable of, and he's basically going to turn a blind eye and just let it happen. So her plan is, if you see there verses 8 through 10, her plan, she's going to write these letters essentially with the king's authority. You think about like a king's signet to stamp a letter, something of that nature. Basically, this is what she's doing, writing with the king's authority, with his stamp on this matter. And she's saying, here's what I need y'all to do. Now think about this. This is not only her making these things happen, but now she's reaching out to those who are leading figures of Samaria or of Jezreel, and she's going to have them also be in on this plot. And she says, I need you to set this man in this position where everybody remembers and thinks about how important he is within the people. I need you to make sure that everybody knows that there is a fast that is taking place. And then I need you to get these two scoundrels to come and make accusation against him and say that he was blaspheming the king and God. Now, she uses God's law to her advantage here. That's why even that comment about her having devilish wisdom, right? Even the devil would use God's word to trick, to deceive Adam and Eve in the garden. That's exactly what she's doing in this matter. Think about it. She called for a public fast. All right, this insinuates the idea that there is grave sin among Israel. So everybody in their own minds is already thinking, well, there's this fast that's going on. It's been announced, so they know something has happened. They know there's some sort of, right, putting their focus on God. They know something has happened, someone has sinned greatly, and they're fixing to be told who it is. Then she takes Naboth, she puts him out there, elevates him in a sense, just to slap him back down, to make all the people think how important he is. And then when these two men come in with these accusations, they're going to turn and think, well, how on earth could this man of such importance say something like this? The law has to be carried out and he has to be stoned to death. Three things she knew. Calling for that public fast would insinuate that there was grave sin among Israel. It took at least two witnesses to bring any accusation against somebody else. And the penalty for someone blaspheming God was being stoned to death. She knew the law, and she used it to her advantage to have this man killed. Corrupt headship often leads to corrupt authority figures, right? This was not one person's act. This was the elders, this was the leaders of that area also taking part in this. Now they're all guilty of murder. Somebody go back to Leviticus chapter 24. We read verse 16 earlier. Somebody read verse 17, Leviticus chapter 24, verse 17.
Whoever kills any man shall surely be put to death.
Right? So essentially, even if you keep reading in that section, it gets into the idea of the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Whatever someone does to somebody else, their punishment should be equal to that. So if you kill someone, your punishment by God's law, under Mosaic law, was death. Jezebel has ordered this hit. These leaders in Israel had partaken in arranging all of this. We're going to come to find out that Ahab, he never even questioned the matter. Probably some guilt going to be put, toward him also in this thing. Nonetheless, all of these people now have participated in killing this man who was one of the only ones through all this section who showed any reverence toward God, who cared anything about what God's word says. And now he's the one that's going to pay the ultimate price. One of the guys I was reading said, when it comes to following after God and being a child of God, you are by no means going to win any popularity contest, right? And we think about that, and we just don't really always put it together, but honestly, look how he's being treated. Being treated as if he is the worst of scoundrels, when he has these two scoundrels be the ones who give this accusation against him, and now he's going to have his life taken. Not only that, when you get to 2 Kings chapter 9, it actually says his sons were also killed. Because if you only kill him, there's still heirs that have this property. Somehow or another, she also had them killed. And then she's going to turn to her husband and say, hey, look, he's dead. He no longer has the land. Go take what you want. That's how he's going to look at it. That's how he's going to treat it. We only have a couple of minutes. Let's go ahead, if someone will. We'll read this next section. Someone go ahead and read verse 11 through 16, and we'll kind of say a little bit and come back to this next week.
So the men of his city, the elders and the nobles who were inhabitants of his city, did as Jezebel had sent to them. As it was written in the letters which she had sent to them, they proclaimed a fast, and seated Naboth with high honor among the people. And 2 men, scoundrels, came in and sat before him. And the scoundrels witnessed against him, against Naboth, in the presence of the people, saying, Naboth has blasphemed God and the king. And they took him outside the city and stoned him with stones so that he died. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. And it came to pass, when Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, that Jezebel said to Ahab, Arise and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money. So Naboth is not alive but dead. So it was when Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, that Ahab got up and went down to take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.
Something to keep in mind, and you can go ahead and kind of start thinking about this for next week and just how that played out, basically exactly as Jezebel ordered. And then once he's actually dead, once Naboth is dead, look at how Ahab responds in this matter. There's no hesitation. There's no reluctance. There's no inquiry of, okay, well, how is this all of a sudden available? None of these things happen. He just turns and says, okay, great. I got what I wanted, without any regard for the cost that came with it. We'll probably go ahead and stop there. We only have about a minute left. We'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll pick back up and kind of discuss that section next week. Appreciate y'all's attention and everyone's thoughts and questions.